Hey guys, welcome back. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on one of history's biggest icons, Napoleon Bonaparte. But forget the hat and the hand in the vest for a second. We're not here to talk about troop movements or bayonet charges. We're here to talk about the one thing that actually makes those bayonets move: money. Napoleon didn't just conquer Europe, he turned the entire continent into a massive revenue stream. Think about it. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers marching with mechanical precision across borders, toppling monarchies and redrawing maps. That doesn't happen on ambition alone. Behind the smoke of the battlefield there was a drama that was much colder and way more calculated. Napoleon built a war machine that essentially forced Europe to finance its own subjugation. Welcome to Hidden Ledger, where we look at the places where money, power, and history collide. And trust me, nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Let's dive into the balance sheets of an empire. Inheriting a financial ghost town. To understand how Napoleon funded his dream, we have to start with a total nightmare. In 1799, when Napoleon seized power, France wasn't exactly winning at life. It was financially traumatized. Go back a few years to the late 1780s. The French monarchy was literally drowning in debt. Why? Because supporting the American Revolution wasn't cheap. It added about 1.3 billion livres to the crown's liabilities. By 1788, interest payments alone were swallowing over half of all royal revenue. Everyone thinks the monarchy fell because of liberty and equality, and sure, that was part of it. But the real reason they were overthrown, they couldn't pay their bills. Then came the Revolution, and with it, a financial experiment that almost deleted France from the map, the assignats. This was paper currency backed by confiscated church lands. At first it seemed like a genius move, turn land into liquidity. But then the government got printer happy. By 1795 they had printed over 45 billion livres. Inflation spiraled, savings evaporated, and trust disintegrated. France was experiencing hyperinflation before it was even a cool term. This was the mess Napoleon inherited. A nation exhausted by terror, economic chaos, and a war against everyone else in Europe. Napoleon, the CFO. Napoleon realized something essential. You cannot wage a permanent war on monetary chaos. His first big move wasn't an invasion, it was a stabilization. In 1800 he established the Bank of France. It wasn't independent like we think of banks today, but it gave the country a structure it desperately needed. In 1803, he dropped the Franc Germinal. This was a metallic currency anchored to both gold and silver. It was stable, it was predictable, and most importantly, it was credible. He centralized tax collection, modernized the admin, and cut down on the blatant corruption that was bleeding the state dry. Inside France, Napoleon ran a surprisingly tight ship. He often balanced the budget in the early years. But here's the kicker. Napoleon didn't want his own citizens to feel the full weight of a permanent war. He knew that if he taxed the French people too much, they'd do to him what they did to the king. So, he came up with a pivot. He exported the bill. War must feed. War Napoleon's business model for the empire was brutally efficient. We call it war feeds war. Here is how the subscription model of 19th century conquest worked. Conquer a territory. Impose a massive indemnity, a pay-to-not-be-destroyed fee. Station your troops in that country, but make them pay for the food, horses, and supplies. Take the remaining cash and use it to fund the next campaign. Let's look at the numbers. In 1805, after crushing Austria at Austerlitz, he forced them to pay 40 million francs. That was a crushing burden for Austria. In 1807, after humiliating Prussia, he hit them with a bill for 120 million francs. To give you some perspective, French military spending at the time was around 600 to 700 million francs a year. A single victory could literally fund months of total war. Napoleon transformed conquest into a predictable cash flow. He wasn't just a general, he was an extractor-in-chief. The Continental gamble and the Russian crash, but every high-growth strategy has a breaking point. Napoleon's biggest rival was Britain. Since he couldn't beat them at sea, he tried to delete them from the economy with the Continental system. He prohibited anyone in Europe from trading with the British. On paper, it was bold. In reality, it was a disaster for everyone except the British. European economies were deeply intertwined with British trade. Textiles, manufactured goods, colonial imports, all of it flowed through British channels. By cutting those links, Napoleon didn't just hurt Britain, he strangled Europe's own economic circulation. Smuggling exploded, black markets thrived, and his allies started getting restless. Russia finally got fed up with the economic strain and broke the rules. Napoleon's response? The infamous 1812 invasion. 600,000 troops, the largest army Europe had ever seen. But this campaign was a financial catastrophe. Unlike his other wars, there was no indemnity at the end of the Russian Trail. No tribute, no new revenue stream. It was all cost and zero return. As the army froze and retreated, Napoleon's expansion model finally stalled. When growth stops, the debt remains. Debt markets versus the Grande Armée. This is the part of the story that really matters for us today. While Napoleon was relying on extractive growth, taking money from people he beat, Britain was playing a different game, the debt market. Image comparing the French Empire's extraction model with Britain's debt market model, Britain leaned heavily on its credit. Through long-term bonds, they financed their wars across decades. Investors bought British debt because they trusted the Bank of England and the Parliament. They believed they'd get their money back. By 1815, British debt was over 200% of their GDP, but they were still standing. Napoleon's system was dynamic but fragile. It needed constant victory to stay liquid. Britain's system was slower, but it was scalable. When Napoleon retreated from Russia and the tribute money stopped flowing, the burden returned home to France. Suddenly, he faced the same structural problem that destroyed the monarchy in 1788. War is expensive, and if you can't borrow and you can't steal, you're done. In the end, it wasn't just armies that defeated Napoleon. It was British capital markets subsidizing his enemies. The legacy, arithmetic, is timeless. So why does any of this matter to you in 2026? Because the patterns haven't changed. Napoleon tried to externalize the cost of his dominance, making others pay for his expansion. Today, we see the same thing in global geopolitics. Economic sanctions are used to redirect pressure outward. Reserve currencies allow nations to export their inflation or attract global capital to fund their own deficits. Napoleon's empire functioned like a leveraged growth strategy. As long as you keep winning, you cover your liabilities. But when the growth stops, the leverage crushes the structure. Whether it's an empire or a personal investment portfolio, the rule is the same. Scale alone doesn't guarantee sustainability. Napoleon was actually a decent CFO for France. He fixed the currency and modernized the admin. But his strategy assumed that he could win forever. History doesn't punish ambition, guys. It punishes unsustainable financing. The real empire that survived 1815 wasn't the one with the most land. It was the one that mastered credit and trust. If this gave you a new perspective on how the world really works, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The answers are always there in the ledger. You just have to know how to read them. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. See less.